Okay, so I think I finally got a kind of Bokeh tutorial. I know I'm probably still saying this wrong, but you know what I'm talking about. Previously I made a video and I said you just can't do it because you can't force the lens to do the focusing that you need in order to get it to do a Bokeh. However, if you're using the autofocus, you could probably do it with manual focus as well, but if you're using the autofocus you can still get quite a decent Bokeh sort of effect. The sort of thing I mean, if you have a look here, I've just taken this picture. In the background there's loads of leaves behind, and they've kind of, where they've blurred out, they've turned into these sort of circular shapes, which is what a lot of people like in Bokeh. Again here behind the fence post, but they turn into these sort of circle shapes. Now the way you do this, you need to have a big gap between you and the subject you're focusing on, and then another big gap between the subject and its background. I did this accidentally. I went to Birdworld and I was taking a picture of a bird, but I had to zoom in because he wasn't near me, and then the whole background just got thrown out into these sort of circles, and that was because there was a big gap between the bird and the background as well. Now that was the theory behind Bokeh, and I knew that, but I couldn't quite get it to work. Reason being, I wasn't using a big enough distance. So I can imagine when you're using lights this is going to work even better. But as you can see, I'm not even using lights behind here. This is different brightness. You get these circular effects. So I'm going to show you that. It's raining at the moment because I live in England and it's nice and unpredictable. Once it stops raining I'm going to take the camera outside and show you a few examples of Bokeh, and hopefully this will help you to do Bokeh. One thing to mention, I do it on AV mode, which is aperture value. The aperture is basically how much light you're letting in through what would essentially be the camera's eyelid. This is my only way of explaining it. So if you imagine squinting, you let in less light, so you're concentrating more on the detail, whereas if your eye is very wide, a lot of information is flooding in your eyes and you try to focus on one thing, everything else blurs out. It's kind of how aperture works for a camera. So if it's focusing on the aperture, it's not going to be concentrating more on the background, which means that you can get a lot more blur. As a quick example, we're on aperture value here. This one's on 2.7, which is great for aperture value. The lower the number the better. But as I zoom in, you'll see that the aperture value can't go as low. That's just basically because the lens zoomed out. It's the relationship between the lens and the camera. You can't get as low an aperture because the lens and the camera can't work that way. But that's okay. As long as you've got it set to the lowest aperture you can, you're going to get some good results. I've managed to bribe my dad to go outside. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to demo that when he's too close to the camera, the Bokeh effect isn't going to work. What you need to have is your lens all the way out so that it's as far as it can see. Okay, so while my father goes to get an umbrella, remember, zoom out as far as we can go. So you go at the line here. Any further than that and that's digital zoom. What I'm going to show you is when my father is closer to the camera, it's going to be harder to blur out the background. When he's further away it's going to work better. So I'm just going to get my dad to go outside and then we'll go through that. Okay. Okay, so basically if I take a picture of my father here, you'll see that although it focuses and it gets rid of the back, you can see the background blurred, it's just not as blurred as it would be with Bokeh. So if I zoom into him now and take a picture, you'll see that there's a fairly big difference between the amount of detail that's coming out. Like these start to blur into shapes rather than, you know, being obvious that they're branches and things. If we do it on a larger scale, okay, so you see we're quite zoomed in there. So he's moved back a lot further now. So if we just find him again, if we zoom in here, right, we're as far as we can go without digital zoom. So what we want to do is we want to avoid big branches like that one behind him, and instead go for more of these sort of smaller leafy details. So if we just move over, let's get a picture of him here. These two new ones we did, you'll see that if you can keep it to smaller leaves rather than big branches, you'll get a better bokeh effect anyway. But if you see here, these branches are still in, but these leaves like really blur now, so that they turn into sort of smudge shapes rather than anything else. So actually, on either side of this picture, you can see the better situation of bokeh. You want to avoid big tree branches and things like that, and go for the smaller detail. So I'm just going to do a secondary example here. Now we've got a bit of fence that has fallen down when it was really windy. You can see just behind that broken bit of fence there's some bushes in the garden next door. So if I just show you an example here, if I zoom in, see that bit of garden fence there, this pole. If I take a picture there, you see that the background is still quite in focus and everything. Whereas if I zoom right into it, you see how it completely threw out that background there? And those leaves turn into circles. It's actually quite handy that it's raining, because you get this weird like lighting effect as well. But yeah, it's the detail in the background has all completely turned into blurred circles. This is kind of what bokeh does. I'm going to try and do an example in the evening as well with some lighting, but I don't have a lot of lighting to work with, so we'll see what we can do. So basically, anything that you can find that's a fair distance from you and has a fairly big distance behind it as well, you can mess around with bokeh style effects. So this would be a perfect example here really. If I had a bird that was feeding on this feeder, it'd be great. I could focus on the bird and that background would be completely thrown out, just like what people want when they're doing bokeh. So I hope that helps. I know it's not the same way that you would do bokeh with a SLR, but it's the same sort of principle. You keep the aperture as low as you can, you keep your lens zoomed, and you keep the distance between you and the object in the background as big as you can, and that will completely throw out the background.